Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for yet another edition of Roadmap to Organizational Strategy on Amogate Radio Communications, this beautiful first Tuesday of the month of September 2024, Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024. How have you been? It's a joy, it's a delight, it's a pleasure, it's a privilege to welcome you to this great edition, and we are very excited to have you with us. How have you been? How have your organizations been? Have your departments been? How's your quarter 3 2024 been thus far, right? We're gradually coming to the end of the quarter, and it's a time to reevaluate again. Hopefully you have been doing your quarterly evaluations like we always advocate for in Amogate, and particularly on Roadmap to Organizational Strategy, right? Today we are going to be looking at challenges of strategy execution, right? Challenges of strategy execution. But as we always like to do, before we begin, we're going to capture some of the highlights of the great session we had with Mr. Awoyemi Awoyokon last Tuesday, and a little bit of what we had with him 2 Tuesdays ago. Remember, Mr. Awoyokon took us on a journey from strategy development to strategy monitoring and evaluation, especially through the lens of technology. We looked at using technology to enable strategy implementation, right? So we looked at using technology to enable strategy development as well as implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and as a matter of fact, also reinvention, right? The dime cycle we have been exploring on this program thus far. We took another journey along that cycle, right now on the wheels of technology. It was a great session. So let me quickly try to capture some of the things that Mr. Awoyokon taught us, or shared with us, or enlightened us on. First of all, 2 Tuesdays ago, he talked about how we can use analytical insights, right? That's data generated analytical insights, how we can ensure that they are not just internally generated, but also externally leveraged. In other words, when we are trying to gather data, we do not necessarily have to gather them internally only. We can also leverage externally so to say, externally coagulated data. By that, I mean you will have channels and sometimes industry-specific data support that you can leverage as an organization. Look at your specific industry and look at the different data support channels that are already available, so you may not necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. This can help with market analytics as well as competitive intelligence. The last week, Tuesday, August 27, 2024, we began by looking at digital collaboration tools and how to ensure that we utilize these tools to ensure or to guarantee better strategy development. Better there meaning more efficient. We looked at things like translation services, where we can be collaborating across the globe, and different nationalities can be hearing, for instance, in their own languages, because the AI tool is translating. We looked at mind mapping, for instance, as also something, right? As you are sharing your ideas, there are tools, digital tools today that can be doing a mind mapping in real time, right? We looked at also immersion tools that make use of virtual reality, right? Through these, even though we are collaborating across the globe, we have avatars and so on that give a sense of the physical presence of team members, therefore creating a stronger sense of bonding, which can be very necessary, especially in the process of strategy development, right? He talked about how AI, that's artificial intelligence, enables the system to also do a summary so you don't miss out on anything. So, we are not sort of interrupting the strategy development process by trying to capture as we are brainstorming, because AI is already doing that for us, right? So all of this help to ensure a deeper level of connection with people, right? And we would also have more data to use when it comes to strategy monitoring, right? Today, we have many tools that can help to ensure that we can cherry pick what's important for each area when it comes to data. So even though there are tons and tons of data available, we also have tools that can help us ensure that we are choosing only what is important for different areas, for different things, for different departments, even for different geographical locations or demographics, right? And this helps us with strategic discrimination, like we have been saying a lot on this program. You don't need to use everything, even when it comes to data. You can synthesize everything, but you don't need to emphasize everything. I repeat, you can synthesize everything, but you don't need to emphasize everything. And technology even helps to ensure that way you can have strategic prioritization as well as strategic discrimination, right? So we also talked about how technology enables strategy implementation, monitoring, uh, through strategy implementation, strategy monitoring, and strategy evaluation, beginning with real-time tracking. Very important. Real-time tracking, right? He told us that many organizations have, all their outputs, connected back to the central processing unit. So almost everything, whether it's your sales, whether it's the number of visitors to your site, whether it is the site, for instance, or the pages, the specific pages on your site that are most frequently visited, or even the times and the locations from which they are most likely and most frequently visited. All of these data, he told us, can be integrated back to the central processing unit. And what this does is that, like I said, it becomes easier to synthesize data. And by the time you are generating insights, they have taken several and probably all factors into account, right? We also talked about how, for many organizations, their actions online are actually getting larger and larger. So whether we like it or not, technology is becoming more and more indispensable. Now, the good thing, like we've been talking about trends analysis and all of that, is that things like machine learning actually help to now take all of this monitoring, right? All this monitoring of online activities. It helps to now, factor it into predictive analytics. We've been talking about trends monitoring and trends analysis on this program, and how we should use this to predict the future, right? Technology is very good in enabling this, so that as we are monitoring, we are now also predicting, and this can help with not just strategy monitoring and evaluation, but also the R of this time cycle, which is strategy reinvention, right? Very, very important. So when we can get that specific with data insights, it can also help us, especially with the reinvention, to further target strategy at what is working and probably de-emphasize what is not working, because as we have been saying, strategy has to be responsive, because the operating environment can be highly dynamic, right? And so all of that data helps us to reinvent strategy when necessary. But when it comes to monitoring, one thing we also talked about is the use of performance dashboards. Very, very important, to help to collect adequate data of internal operations as well as external markets ongoings, leading to data-driven decisions. Very, very important. What performance dashboards do basically is that they highlight critical things, so that from across the globe in your different organizations, even if you want to put it as your screensaver, for instance, however you want to do it, there can be very high-level communication of the current status of your critical strategy, right? And that's why we keep talking about strategic prioritization, because one thing you also need to know is that you cannot put everything on your performance dashboards. You will have to define what your strategic priorities are, but technology can enable you to ensure that there's a constant focus on these priorities. Very, very, very important. Now, why is it critical as we go into today's topic, which is the challenge of strategy execution? Why is it important to make this connection? Let me begin by saying that, unfortunately, as important as strategy development is, we've said that strategy development is a foundation, and clearly it's like building a house without a plan, right? You cannot execute strategy except there has first been a conceptualized strategy. However, as important as it is, as critical as it is, as foundational as it is, unfortunately, strategy implementation is still significantly challenged, right? unfortunately, the data still indicates that about 60 to 90% of organizations fail to implement the strategies they have developed. I need to repeat that. The data still indicates that about 60 to 90% of organizations fail to execute develop strategies. And that is very concerning. Now, that's not news to us in Amogate. It's part of the reason why we do what we do. We've studied this thing for close to 2 decades, and we've seen again and again that strategy development, as beautiful, as important, as critical, as as phenomenal as it can be sometimes, is still not sufficient to guarantee organizational success and sustainability. We've seen it repeatedly, even from the data we have gathered, that many times across sectors, strategy execution can be a significant challenge, right? Some data shows as high as 90% of organizations failing to implement strategy. I think Professor Robert Kaplan of Harvard Business School said about 90% of organizations fail to execute their strategy. Another researcher said about 70% of organizations fail to fully execute their strategic plans. Yet another researcher indicated an average of 60 to 90%, which is what I think I would put it at, right? Of saying the range, I'll put it at between 70 to 90. So yeah, 60 to 90%. Now, even if it is 50%, it's concerning how much more when it is as high as an average of 60 to 90%, right? Even if you take the midpoint between 60 to 90%, you're still talking about 75%, which means that 3 out of 4 organizations could be failing to execute their strategy on their average, and that is very concerning. Therefore, as important as strategy development is, in as much as you cannot live in your architectural blueprint and you can only live in a house that has been built from the architectural blueprint, we will have to go beyond the conversation about strategy formulation to the conversation about strategy implementation. It's on this note that I welcome you very warmly again to today's edition of Roadmap to Organizational Strategy, where we are looking at the challenges of strategy execution and probable solutions, the challenges of strategy execution and probable solutions, right? So what exactly is this that is challenging strategy execution? Let's go back to one of the key points or the key takeaways of last week's session with Mr. Yemi Awoyoko. I said there's a need for those performance dashboards to highlight what is important. However, I also said that those performance dashboards, right, cannot define what the strategic priorities are. You will still have to define the strategic priority. And this is where the issue of the nexus between the human and technological aspects of strategy come in, right? Technology has a very strong role to play. We spent the last 2 weeks talking about that. However, even last week, I remember saying that technology cannot define those priorities for you. There are certain things that the human mind will still have to do. What technology does is that it helps with as much data, as much insights to provide a guide and to help one have a data-driven approach to decision making. After all that has been done, you still have to define these priorities and communicate those priorities. This is extremely important because in looking at the causes, right, causes of strategy implementation failures, ineffective communication of strategic goals is one of those that stood out. Ineffective communication, and I'm talking about across studies. About 3, 4, 5 studies showed that ineffective strategic goals is one of the reasons why, unfortunately, strategic plans do not get implemented. Now, I'm not just talking about talking down at people, and this is why we do what we do at Amogate. When we talk about co-creation, it's because we've seen it again and again, right? When we talk about ineffective communication, to begin with, communication is a two-way street. This is so critical that I was almost tempted to title today's episode, The Role of Communication in Strategic Implementation. That's how important it is. It was a top recurring factor in study after study. When we don't have effective, wholesome, robust, and a two-way communication that would typically lead to co-creation, then you can almost kiss strategy execution goodbye. Very, very important. According to a PwC study, PwC is a leading consulting firm, PricewaterhouseCoopers, companies which, focus time and energy sufficiently on strategy implementation are 3 times more likely to report above average growth, 3 times more likely to report above average growth, and twice as likely to report above average profit than those who do not focus time and energy on strategy implementation. However, this strategy implementation is usually not carried out by those who do the bulk of the strategy formulation. I repeat, often this strategy implementation is often not carried out by those who do the bulk of the strategy formulation. And this is where the disconnect begins many times. Many times the disconnect begins because by the time you are trying to communicate to those who actually implement the strategy, you are often talking to them rather than talking with them. I'll say that again. By the time you're trying to engage those who are supposed to implement strategy, many times as organizational leaders, we are often talking to them rather than talking with them. So I'll go back to this, one of the top causes of ineffective, poor, honestly, sometimes disheartening strategy execution rates. One of these top causes is ineffective communication of strategic goals, right? Now, apart from the collaborative nature of the communication that I've tried to emphasize, another thing is that the specificity of the communication has often been a challenge too, right? Specificity of the communication. It's been found that many times the communication is not carried out in a manner that enhances clarity. Many times after the communication is done, if you go back and you take a sample of organizations, we've worked in an organization before, and sometimes try to take the sample, how many of the so-called, especially next level leaders, not the fully top level leaders that carried out the bulk of the strategy formulation, but the next level, how many of them actually understand what the top goals are. Many times you will be surprised at the percentage of communication that is lost because there is lack of strategic clarity. And this is why we often emphasize strategic prioritization. When you load too much into it, you don't have goals. In one of the reports I read, they actually used the language ambiguity, and I laughed. It resonated strongly with me because in the absence of strategic clarity, you will simply have ambiguity. So people are not clear. And like we said before, once people are not clear on what the priorities are, they will then begin to decide what they should allocate their time and resources to, because there is no clarity, and therefore there will be no unity. And thus, subsequently, unfortunately, what the organization sees at the top, once it is not clearly transmitted to lower levels of the organization, resources are not allocated in a manner that ensures strategic alignment. Extremely important. So this communication must be carried out in a collaborative manner. The communication must be, very co-creative. In addition, it must also be carried out to guarantee high-level strategic clarity. Very important. And that begins with leadership. It's the job of leadership to use the insights garnered from the data to define specific and priority goals. You cannot pursue everything simultaneously from time to time, from period to period, a 3 to 5 year period, an annual period, even for a quarter. Sometimes you need to define what your strategic priorities are. Extremely important. And that way it is easier to achieve clarity in communication, right? Once you have scattered all over the place, you cannot have clarity. Once you are, I remember an organization we once worked with that said they had 13 strategic goals, and we responded that they cannot be strategic. They cannot be strategic, and they'll be 13. You've thrown the organization, and this organization had over 30,000 staff. You've thrown them in different directions. Each of the 30,000 staff will simply be defining and deciding what is important. However, they don't have many times those at those lower levels will not have the full information to discriminate. So you that have the full information and insight, the 13-man or the 10-man team that sits at the top of 30,000 need to use all of those strategic insights, all of the data gathered to make this necessary strategic discrimination in order to attain strategic prioritization. Then you can communicate with clarity. Then you can go down to the lower level and say, look, we are not not focusing on more than 3 to 5 things, right? These are the top 3 priorities, or these are the top 5 priorities. Maximum, we will not recommend more than 5. We would often encourage you to try to streamline them into 3 and at a maximum 5 strategic priorities. Once they are going beyond that number, then we don't know the meaning of priorities anymore. It's really important once you have that prioritization, it is easier to have clarity of communication. This is still Total Mother on Amogate Radio Communications this beautiful Tuesday, September 3rd, 2024. You're very welcome. It's a joy, it's a privilege to have you with us on the program, and we hope that you're taking away some things already as we speak. What else was found to be a cause of ineffective or poor implementation of strategic plans, right? It was also seen that many times there were challenges with risk management. I think that's the third and the last one I'll be stopping with before we now begin to discuss more of the solutions, right? Once those risks are not effectively anticipated, then it becomes more challenging to deal with them. Strategy implementation is challenging. Report after report indicates it. And one of the worst things you can do as a leader, especially as a leader, is to think you will not have challenges on the road to your implementation. You are not going to have challenges on the road to your strategic destination. That's an illusion. As a matter of fact, that shows that you're not ready for leadership, right? A true leader would anticipate and plan for the possible challenges on the road to strategy implementation, which is why we talked about predictive analytics last week. We talked about how do you use data to throw up those flags. I remember Mr. Awoyoku saying something about having your red lights and even your amber lights that trigger indicators, warning that based on the data, because of 1, 2, 3, 4 factors that are recurring, this risk is heightened. Extremely important. And as I prepared for today's program, I also remembered a program we had done, I think early last year. I can't remember exactly when. We called it Leadership and Crisis Management. It was a whole quarter. I ran that program on ARC and Amogate Radio Communications, looking at leadership and crisis management. And we said, if you cannot predict crisis, you are already in a crisis. You must do your best to anticipate crisis, and that's why you build a house with a fire escape, right? Any true house is built with a fire escape, because you're asking yourself, should this happen, what is the escape route, right? Or the escape route, like Americans would say. So it's really important, to anticipate those crises. That's another challenge that was found to be another cause of ineffective strategy implementation, the inability to sufficiently anticipate risks, what can go wrong with this plan, and to make accommodations for such risks. Should this happen, these are the things we are going to do, right? Non-alignment of initiatives was also seen to be a cause, but I will still bring this under the failure of communication, because once communication is poor, then you will have initiatives scattered in different directions. Like I've said, once you say there are 13 strategic priorities, people will just begin to choose, and they will not often have enough data to determine what the true priorities are. But you at the leadership level with the full data should take responsibility for defining and streamlining those priorities, so that way initiatives can be more aligned to what the true priorities are, because they have been streamlined, right? Now let's go on to the solutions, because there are solutions, right? I try to categorize these solutions into what I call the 3 R's. The 3 R's, right? Reorientation of communicative practices. Reorientation. 2, resource allocation, to ensure that it is tied to the principle of strategic prioritization. And number 3, risk management. So reorientation, resource allocation, and risk management. Of course, I want to talk a little bit about the reorientation of communicative practices to begin with. I want to talk a little bit more about it. Now, if report after report, like I said, almost every report put this as one of the top factors. Some mentioned it first, if this issue of communication is very, very important, to strategy implementation, I would want to strongly suggest that organizations review their strategic communication practices. I said something, and I'm not playing to the gallery, or I'm not just making a case for what we do. I said this is why we do what we do. One of our practice areas in Amogate is strategic communication, because we have seen practically in close to 2 decades of operating what it does to an organization when there is non-strategic communication. What is strategic communication? Strategic communication is a communication principle, practice, policy, beginning with a communication philosophy that is tied to your strategic direction. You think about your strategic direction and you ask yourself as an organizational leader, what kind of communication practices would best enable the achievement of this strategic vision? That is strategic communication. Any form of communication practice that is not enabling the achievement of your strategic direction, that is not, guiding everyone towards their strategic goal, that is not, pointing the way towards the vision, that is not reinforcing the central and strategic message, is not strategic. A lot of communication practices could be going on, but are they actually strategic communication practices? I don't know. You need to do, just like we do culture audits in Amogate, you also need to do a communications audit. What is our communication practice like? Technical communication, digital communication, leadership communication, which is a strong part of it, peer-to-peer communication. What kind of communication practices do we have in this organization? And can this communication practice enable the achievement of our strategic goals, or is it likely to pull us further away without knowing it? Very important. You don't want to get to the end of 3 years of your strategic planning period, strategic plan period, or 5 years, or even, 1 year as much as possible without discovering that your communication practices are not enabling the achievement of your strategic goal. Unfortunately, this has happened many times in organizations, and one major solution we would like to recommend is a communications audit practice. Please feel free to call us. We are very good in this. We've done this severally and we've done this thoroughly. Let us help to review your strategic communications practices. It's very important to carry out a communications audit, beginning with your communications philosophy, then proceed into your communications policy, from there to communications practices, right? But it all begins with communications philosophy. And many times we often encourage a retreat where the leadership can have reflective conversations on this. We also encourage surveys to also get the take of those who are being communicated to, because it's one thing for you to think you are communicating effectively as leadership, is another thing for the people to actually give feedback and say, sorry, these are the inefficiencies in the communication practices of the organization, in a very unrestrained and non-threatening manner. We've carried out some of these audits, like I said, for organizations we've worked with, and we've been very glad to report back to management, that this is what your people are saying you're doing well as organization in terms of communication practices, but these are the areas that you also need to watch out for based on the feedback we got. Completely anonymized feedback, but these are things we have carried out. So communication audits are very, very important to ensure that the communication practices will not hinder the achievement of your strategic plans, and that you will not find out only too late that you have failed to achieve your organization's strategy because of poor or ineffective communication habits, right? So that's the first R, reorientation, right? Especially of your communication practices. The second R is resource allocation. This is something that we've emphasized again and again on this program, and there's a reason we keep emphasizing it. It's very concerning what a lack of strategic prioritization can do. Let me give you an example. Even as an individual, if you sit down and you budget and you want to have a budget, it's important to begin by defining your priorities. You need to define your priorities before you can create a budget. If this and these are the things that are important to you as an individual, that are important to you as a family, and then you take it forward, important to you as an organization, as an institution, then you should allocate the majority of your resources to those things. And again, this is where data comes in. I read of an organization that's in trying to streamline their finances. they decided to cut off what they did not realize was the most productive part of their enterprise. They decided to dismiss many of their field sales staff, not knowing that they were the ones generating the most profit, instead of cutting off archaic IT infrastructure. Of course, they found out too late, only in retrospect. That's what you don't want to do. Your resource allocation must be aligned with your strategic priorities based on data-driven insights. Extremely important. What is the data saying? Where and I don't want to go into ambidexterity here. I think this is where we're going to camp around next week. But let me just quickly highlight that, that thing we keep talking about in Amogate, ambidexterity, the ability to balance exploitation of your current strengths with exploration of your future possibilities. It's important when it comes to resource allocation. A percentage of your resources definitely should be going to your current strength, and another percentage should be going to your future possibilities. This must be balanced, and this is only done intentionally and deliberately when you are reviewing your strategy and saying, what is giving us the largest income now? Now, when you're trying to balance your current strength with your future possibilities, in terms of the things that are giving you your current flows, as you take decisions about that, you must also learn to take decisions to cut off certain things that may have outlived their usefulness. I repeat, this is where leadership courage comes in. If the data has indicated that certain things have completely outlived their usefulness, and the data is indicating that they may not regain that relevance, especially based on market trends, then please, for the good Lord's sake, cut it off. I was reading about an organization, I think it was Standard Chartered Bank in the United Kingdom, headquartered in the UK, that saved about 1.5 billion, not M, be $1.5 billion, or because they were able to identify that certain archaic IT infrastructure was no longer going to be needed, and they needed to focus more on integrating their cloud, their data, and their analytics. And they let go of those legacy. When I say legacy, now don't get me wrong, the good part of it needed to be maintained and translated into cloud storage and so on and so forth. But as far as keeping infrastructure that had already become outdated, they didn't do that anymore. So this resource allocation issue comes in three streams. Like I said, you have to look at the present and you have to look at the future. I've emphasized that through ambidexterity. There will be certain things that are giving you a lot of resources and are likely to keep giving you a lot of resources. You want to devote adequate funds to that, and there'll be certain things with future possibilities, because you have to think innovatively and you have to be forward thinking. They may not be maturing yet immediately, but you can see the potential, and you also have to invest an appropriate sum in that, an appropriate sum of money in that. Having done that, the third part is also the past streams that may no longer provide future, even present income, and you've looked at the trend and you have gathered the data and you have looked at the market analytics. Please don't be afraid to let go of such things. They may never regain their relevance, and you want to save cost on those things, and if necessary, let go of them and get some savings that can then be reallocated to more efficient things, especially when it comes to the strategies for the future, right? So we've looked at the first R, the reorientation of your communication practices. We looked at the second R, the reallocation of resources. The second R is big on resources, right? You have to learn to allocate resources based on strategic priorities. Very, very important. Of course, the third R is risk management, and it begins a lot with crisis prediction, risk predictions. Do not expect a smooth sail. It's an illusion to think that the journey from strategy formulation to strategy implementation would be without challenges. Then you're not ready for leadership. You are ready for fairy tales. And as far as I know, only children do fairy tales, right? When you're mature, you are ready to anticipate and proactively plan for possible risks that could arise in the course of strategy implementation, so you are more positioned to deal with them in a more realistic manner. Well, I think it's on this note that we're going to draw a curtain on today's edition of the program. Remember, today we have tried to look at challenges of strategy execution, and we have also tried to discuss probable solutions, challenges of strategy execution, and their probable solutions, right? Communication has been a big one. Poor communication, which is of course still tied to lack of prioritization, right? And then we've also tried to propose solutions to that, right? Reevaluate your communication, philosophy, practices, the philosophy, the policies, the practices, and reinvent them. Don't just reevaluate, but also reinvent as necessary. And this is where we are very happy to work with you. It's our strength, it's what we do, it's what we love doing, and we can work with you to do that. Also look at your allocation of resources. If you call something a priority, then check how much you're allocating to it. Many times we've seen organizations say, oh, innovation is a priority. So what's your innovation budget? Then they're looking at us in the face and we say, then it's such a priority. If it's a true priority, it must be reflected in, budgeting, extremely important. We must learn to allocate resources to what we define as priorities. And last but definitely not the least, there must also be proactive risk management practices. Thank you very much for doing this with us. We hope you've been able to learn some things. We look forward to working with you. Please check us out on www.theamogate.org. We can work with you on strategic communication. We can work with you on strategic prioritization. We can work with you on review your funding and budgeting practices and so on and so forth. We're glad to have done this with you, and we look forward to hearing back from you. Please follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, follow us on LinkedIn. Also send us your feedback. You can send us your feedback on contact@theamogate.org. You can check out our website, and we can't wait to implement some of these things you've been hearing. Until then, we look forward to being back with you same time, same station next week. You can check out our MixLR page. You can also check out our YouTube page, right? We have over 90 videos, including the leadership crisis management I was referring to, uploaded there for your learning, and they are all free, like my colleague Adequate likes to say. Thank you so much. See you same time, same station next week. Until then, please think strategy, execution. See you.